Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagley. Today's topic centers around the conjugate method for everyday athletes or hybrid athletes. We're going to discuss the anti-periodization system that is probably the best solution for real-world performance. So oftentimes, the hybrid athlete, the everyday athlete, fails at their training because they're trying to run endurance programming on top of linear strength programs. You get stuck into this constant trade-off of strong but slow or fit but fragile. And so the conjugate method works to solve this problem better than almost anything else, but only if you understand how to adapt it to your training. So this is not going to be West Side for powerlifters. This isn't powerlifting max. This is how to apply conjugate training to hybrid performance. So let's give a little bit of a background on what this episode is and what it's not. So this is going to be a framework for training multiple physical qualities at once. It's built around a chaotic life. It's built around missed sessions, poor sleep, and the actual real life things that come up in your everyday life. And it also provides a long-term, strategic, systematic approach to building strength, durability, and elite level fitness and conditioning. So, now why do hybrid athletes break the traditional periodization paradigm? We oftentimes fall into a linear trap where linear assumes stable recovery, predictable schedules, and a primary goal at the end of a specific phase. But as a hybrid athlete, someone who wants to be strong, who wants to have elite level fitness, someone who may compete in endurance-based events, often experiences things that aren't typical of someone who should benefit from linear periodization, right? Running mileage can fluctuate, and it puts a tremendous amount of physiological stress on the body that doesn't always make linear periodization the most appropriate. Again, that conditioning stress isn't linear. And life as an everyday athlete who has a job, who has a family, you have different interferences coming from all over the place. And so how do you develop a system that is going to help you to deliver body composition changes that are favorable for what your goals are? Strength adaptations that are favorable for you. Conditioning adaptations that are favorable for you. Okay, you have these concurrent demands where you need to be strong, lower body, upper body strength. You need muscular endurance. You need aerobic capacity. And certain times you need anaerobic repeatability, the ability to put out high outputs over multiple bouts, multiple instances. And you also need to have incredible tissue resilience that allows your body to withstand all of the different stresses that you're imposing on it as an everyday athlete, as a hybrid athlete. And so linear periodization handles only one of those well at a single time. But conjugate allows you to handle all of them at the same time, simultaneously. So now a little bit of background on conjugate training. Okay, this method was popularized by West Side Barbell. It was developed under Louis Simmons, and it is built around 3 effort methods: the max effort, the dynamic effort, and the repetition effort. Max effort as it sounds, and we've talked about all of these in detail on the podcast before, but just a little bit of brief summary. Max effort is your strength work. It is 1 rep max or very close to it. It is high strain, high threshold motor unit recruitment that is designed to build strength. Typically 1 session performed a week for upper body and 1 for lower body. Then we have the dynamic effort. This is more speed and power work, okay, where you're focusing on moving a barbell at an incredibly fast speed, often using bands or chains, but you're using submaximal load. This develops that ability to tap in to those muscle fibers quicker and move through a movement faster. And then for hypertrophy, for tissue resilience, we've got the repetition method, where we're doing multiple repetitions, high rep work to build the musculature that supports our strength work and our powerful work. Now, this system was designed for powerlifters, but it was never all about powerlifting, but it's about special strength qualities. So the core principles of this method are being able to train multiple qualities year-round. Strength does not pause conditioning work. Conditioning doesn't erase your strength work. And really, there are no true off-seasons for these key abilities. The second is rotating stress and not progress. And this is a key. Movement variation in your max effort movements specifically protects your joints, keeps you healthy, keeps you from getting injured over the long term. And that stress rotates while output stays high. We're still pushing every session, but we're not required to push as hard because the stress that we're implying is a little bit different. Progress instead now shows up as better bar speed, as better tolerance to the movements, and better recovery from doing those movements. Ultimately, it's a weakness-driven program. Every accessory has a job. There are no fun exercises that we're choosing. It doesn't fix something, then it doesn't go in the program. If you are weak in the low back, then we're going to do work to develop the low back, to make your squat stronger, to make your deadlift stronger. If you're weak in the lockout of a bench press, guess what? Tricep work is going to dominate because these are the little accessories that help to build towards that main lift. And so weakness-driven programming is key. Now, why does the classical West Side Barbell Conjugate fail for the hybrid athlete, and how can we fix it? The first problem is max effort abuse. What we're talking about is weekly 1RM testing, always going for a true 1RM, and that destroys the nervous system. Okay, the nervous system cannot keep up with that whenever now we're imposing our conditioning work demands onto this. The average hybrid athlete, the average everyday athlete especially, someone who has all those other life stressors, they carry a high central nervous system load from the outside work, from the conditioning work, from their job, from their families. And so instead of using that true 1RM method, we're going to use heavy but submaximal. Thinking RPE 8 to 9, right? Where our top sets are heavy, but they're not grinders. We're still getting a little bit of strain, but we're leaving just a little bit left in the tank. Here we can also use a lot of isometrics and concentrics and pauses, changing the tempos of the movement instead of just hammering maximum singles all the time. The second is dynamic effort dogma. Bar speed and bands and chains are not magic. I use them. I love programming them. But dynamic effort instead is all about intent. Your effort level towards focusing on that movement instead of obsessing over what band strength, what chain, how many chains should we have on the bar. We need to be able to control the acceleration. We need to still use moderate loads to get the stimulus that's needed to develop that power, but we're going to modify it in just a little bit. Short rest intervals to be able to blend that strength work and that work capacity. The third problem is ignoring the conditioning stress. The typical West Side Conjugate model was designed and used for powerlifters. It assumes that lifting is that primary stressor, that the performance on the bar in those bench press, deadlift, squat movements is the primary outcome. But as a hybrid athlete, you're going to get crushed by total weekly stress that's not gym specific. Okay, so conditioning now dictates the lifting intensity, not the other way around. Some weeks are more strength biased, some weeks are more engine biased, but Conjugate allows that flexibility without resetting blocks, without needing to program specific phases that only develop one quality at a time. So now let's go through and redefine some of these methods for hybrid athletes. Max effort now becomes maintaining high neural output, using heavy triples, pause lifts, isometric mid-range holds, and training that for the lower body once a week and the upper body once a week maximum. That's it. We need to maintain that strength, but we don't need to tap on it every single session. For repetition effort, right? This is where our hypertrophy work and our tendon health and our durability live. They thrive within this work. Okay. Our accessories, our unilateral work, our single leg, single arm, our posterior chain. If you're a runner, right? Tendon health of the calves and of the Achilles and of the knee. Very, very important, right? So this is where you can get a high return for very low risk. We're using very low weights. We're developing the muscles that we need to still develop, but we're doing so in a way that fits within this system. All right, this is where most of your work should live. You hit your max effort movement of the day or your dynamic effort movement of the day, and you spend the entire session working on those weaknesses that are weaknesses both in the gym and outside of the gym, where your conditioning focuses are. And then third, the dynamic effort. This is where we are building strength, but under a bit of fatigue. We're building strength, but with incomplete recovery. We're building power here. We're maintaining our ability to fire our muscles fast, using short rest periods, moderate loads, and intentional tempo. We still need to be powerful. We still want to be explosive, but we can modify it in a way. So here we might do more jump work instead of the traditional barbell with bands and chains. Right? We might do box jumps or plyos, okay? Modifying in just a way that allows us to still hit our strength work, but still have enough, reserve energy outside of the gym. Now, how do I structure this on a weekly basis? Okay, what does our programming schematic look like? I tend to focus around 3 to 4 lifting days a week, using either an upper, lower, or a full body split. I'll try to stick with strength work early on and conditioning later on, or completely separate as needed. Meaning, if we're going to train strength work and conditioning in the same day, then we'll try to do our strength work earlier in the session and then separate that out altogether. So you might do a morning strength, afternoon run. If we have to train in the same session, then let's start with our strength work and then do conditioning after that. Now with conditioning, here, this is all dependent on the individual, but typically 2 to 4 conditioning days a week is adequate. At least touching on zone 2 work twice a week, and then some threshold or tempo intervals, a little bit of speed, more workout stuff, and then our short anaerobic exposures as needed. But ultimately, strength should support the conditioning instead of competing with it. That is the key here, and that's the key for the everyday athlete. So how do we build conditioning within a conjugate framework? This could serve as its own episode, but briefly, it's its own method. Okay, we're going to rotate modalities. We're going to rotate durations. We're going to rotate intensities. Maybe we'll ski. Maybe we'll row. Maybe we'll bike. Maybe we'll do mixed modality work. Okay, ultimately, we want to keep the engine, our aerobic capacity, developing year round. We don't want to allow aerobic capacity to detrain because we are building strength. We want to maintain that during that phase while we're building strength, while we're getting stronger, while we're getting more explosive and more powerful. This is why Conjugate works so well for the athletes who are doing things like high rocks or who come from a CrossFit background, because you can be able to train that strength while still be able to fit within your conditioning work. It works excellent for hybrid athletes, tactical professionals, busy adults with inconsistent schedules, and ultimately those who are focused on lifelong performance that they are able to maintain throughout their life. This is not for beginners per se. It's not for the aesthetic only lifters, those who just want to look good. And it's not for those who truly need a rigid schedule in order to stay consistent, because we're rotating. There's variation built in, and it works incredibly well for still developing strength, power, explosiveness, and conditioning, which develops that well-rounded, high-performing, everyday athlete. The goal isn't to peak, but the goal is to never fall off. When you adapt this program correctly, I've seen it in practice, I've used it myself. It is one of the best long-term systems for developing hybrid performance. So thanks for listening to the Everyday Strength Podcast. If today's episode helped you learn something, do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. This helps the show grow, and it ensures that you never miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment. I read all of them. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, then a quick 5-star review goes a long way in pushing this information to more people. If you want to go deeper, then join the Performance Edge Network. It's free to join, and it gets you access to my weekly newsletter, which is full of training breakdowns, physiology deep dives, and tools that you can apply immediately to become a stronger, fitter, higher performing everyday athlete. And if you're ready for structured programming, then I've got options for whatever path you're on. The Peak Performance Training Program is my flagship strength and conditioning program. And I also offer Peak 3X, which is a 3-day per week version for busier athletes, along with other programs designed for hybrid competitors, runners, and anyone who wants to train like an athlete year round. You can find all those and more at haleystrength.com. I appreciate you being here. Keep training hard, and I'll see you in the next episode.